The wind came first, sharp and slicing through the open prairie like a knife, howling against the battered fences and rattling the windows of the old ranch house. Rhett had lived through plenty of storms before, but this one felt alive, angry, purposeful. The rain didn't fall so much as hurl itself sideways, slamming against the porch, filling the air with grit and water and the scent of earth being torn apart. He'd been working in the barn when the first clap of thunder hit. The sound rolled through his bones like cannon fire, and before he could even look up, the roof gave way. The rafters groaned, the wood splintered, and then the floor shook as something heavy crashed down near the cellar doors. He heard Clara scream. By the time Rhett reached her, the ground outside had already begun to sink. The earth had turned to sludge, swallowing the lower half of the cellar steps, and Clara was trapped halfway down, mud rising around her legs. Her pale hands were smeared brown, clawing at the walls of the pit as rain poured over her face. "Clara!" he shouted, dropping to his knees. "Hold on, I've got you." She looked up, her eyes wide with terror. "It's pulling me down!" she gasped, the wind stealing her words. "Rhett, please. I can't—" He didn't let her finish. He threw himself flat and started digging with his bare hands. The shovel had vanished somewhere in the chaos, maybe swept off by the current that was starting to snake its way down from the pasture. The mud clung to his fingers like cement. Every scoop came up heavy and slow. He could feel the cold bite into his arms, but he didn't care. "Don't you quit on me," he said through gritted teeth. "You hear me, Clara? Don't you dare!" Lightning flashed close enough to turn the world white for a heartbeat. When his vision cleared, the barn was half gone. The roof had caved in completely, beams jutting from the wreck like broken ribs. One of them had landed across the top of the cellar, pinning part of it shut. Clara's voice broke through the storm. "Deeper. Please, I can't take it anymore." The words made him freeze. She wasn't begging for help anymore. She was begging for air. The dirt was up to her waist now, sucking her down inch by inch, each breath shorter than the last. Rhett's heart slammed in his chest. He clawed harder, his fingers bleeding, but the ground wouldn't give. He could see the panic in her face, the way she fought not to cry, not to make it harder for him. For a moment, he almost couldn't breathe either. Then the thunder cracked again, closer this time, and the world shuddered. The broken beam above them shifted, groaning as the soaked roof began to slide toward them. He had seconds to decide. Keep digging, or do something, anything, to stop the roof from collapsing completely. He glanced at Clara. She was shaking, still trying to push herself upward, her lips trembling. "Rhett," she whispered, "please." That single word tore something open inside him. He looked around, found a coil of rope half buried under the mud and grabbed it. The idea came without thought, pure instinct. He looped one end around the nearest post, tied the other around the beam, and braced his body under it. The wood was slick and heavy, pressing down with the weight of the world. The strain was unbearable. His back screamed, his hands slipped, his boots sank into the muck. But as the beam lifted, just enough for air to reach the hole, he saw Clara drag herself higher, coughing, spitting out mud, her hands stretching toward him again. He couldn't move. Couldn't speak. The rain hit harder, drowning out everything except her desperate breaths. He just held on, praying the rope would hold, praying the roof would stay up long enough. And in that frozen instant, with thunder tearing the sky apart above him, Rhett realized he might not be coming back up. The storm had spent itself sometime before dawn, leaving behind a silence so heavy it felt like the air itself had given up. The world was gray, muted, the kind of morning that looked washed clean but hollowed out. A thin mist hung over the fields, softening the edges of the broken fences and the twisted remains of the barn. The ranch that had once stretched proud and alive across the plains was now a graveyard of splintered wood and drowned soil. Rhett sat near the collapsed cellar, his back resting against a half-buried beam, his head bowed. His hands were blistered raw, caked in blood and mud that the rain hadn't managed to wash away. His hat was gone, his hair plastered to his forehead, streaked with dirt and rainwater. Around him, the ground looked like it had been clawed apart by desperate hands. And it had. His. The rope lay coiled beside him, frayed where it had rubbed against the splintered post all night. He'd tied it off just before the worst of the wind hit, using what little strength he had left to anchor the beam that had threatened to crush them both. Then he'd wedged himself beneath it, pressing upward with his shoulders until the muscles in his back burned white-hot. He'd held there, shaking, teeth gritted, praying it would be enough to keep the roof from caving. When the light came, it found him still there, motionless. The first sound that broke the silence wasn't the wind or the birds. It was coughing, wet, ragged human. Then came a scraping noise, the sound of someone pulling themselves out of the earth. A pale hand appeared from the edge of the pit, followed by another. Clara dragged herself upward, gasping, blinking through the mud in her eyes. Her hair was tangled, her clothes soaked through, every inch of her shaking. She crawled onto the flat stretch of ground, coughing so hard it brought tears to her eyes. For a long moment she didn't see him. The world was still blurred, her head ringing from the hours of darkness and fear. Then her gaze caught on a familiar shape through the fog. The broad shoulders, the boots sunk deep in the mud, the quiet stillness that should not have been so still. Rhett. Her voice cracked, barely more than a whisper. She dragged herself toward him, her knees sinking into the muck with every inch. Rhett, wake up. When she reached him, she hesitated. He was sitting upright, but his eyes were half closed, unfocused. His chest didn't move. The faintest hint of a smile rested on his lips. Peaceful, almost proud. She touched his arm, her hand trembling. His skin was cold. No, she breathed. No, no, no. The wind stirred again, carrying the smell of wet earth and rain. She pressed her forehead to his shoulder, her tears mixing with the mud on his coat. For a while, she said nothing. The storm had taken everything, the cattle, the barn, the fences. But she would have traded it all again if it meant one more breath from him. After a long time, she forced herself to sit back. Her hands lingered on his, tracing the scars, the rope burns, the lines of strength that had once held her whole world together. She looked toward the horizon where the sun was just beginning to break through the clouds, a thin ribbon of gold stretching across the wet plains. "You did it," she whispered. Her voice shook, but there was warmth in it now, quiet and broken and grateful. "You saved me." The wind carried her words across the empty fields, over the wreckage, through the hollow shell of the barn that still leaned stubbornly against the sky. The light grew stronger, brushing over Rhett's face, catching in the corner of his still mouth, as though the dawn itself was trying to thank him. Clara stayed there beside him until the mist began to lift. She didn't cry anymore. The world around her was still, listening, holding its breath with her. Somewhere deep in that silence, the land seemed to whisper back, a promise that his strength, his sacrifice, would not be forgotten. And when she finally rose to her feet, her knees shaking, she looked once more at the endless stretch of the plains. The storm had taken nearly everything, but it had left her his courage, and that she knew would have to be enough to keep the ranch and his memory alive.